So we're going to actually carry on a little bit from what we've just been listening to about digital transformation. And the title is Ensuring a Successful Data-Driven Transformation that Delivers Value Right from the Start, AI Leaders' Perspective. Now, this is something I've been kind of interested in because for the last, 20 years as an academic or a little bit more, and then about 20 years prior to that while I was at Rolls-Royce Aerospace up in Derby. So as the IT sort of consultant go-between the businesses and IT, I've been trying to find ways of actually delivering value. And we've also seen that digital transformation is kind of a little bit like the sort of transformations we've been doing over the last 20, 30 years. And we keep talking about the technology. And yet, when we did business process reengineering back in the 90s and early 2000s, the technology, yes, it's expensive, but it is essentially trivial to implement compared with the problems of the people. And it kind of touched on that very gently in the last session about the problems of going enterprise-wide. It's great to have a little team who's developing some cool technology that's coming up with some fabulous insights, at least while in proof of concept. And yet, when it gets out into the wild, about 85% of all AI-related projects fail. So why? Well, I've got various students in their master's, a few in the audience, I think, who are going to be doing their independent studies dissertation on why does AI fail, and what are the factors that are involved. We don't know yet. We just know that AI is even less successful than ordinary IT implementations. So let us start introducing ourselves around. Helen, on the right, and also one or two of your key questions that you're going to be posing and investigating, or we're going to discuss.
Hi everyone, I'm Helen Packard from the Bank of England. So I look after digital skills and I also look after FinTech and RegTech programs, so change manager from background. In terms of the two questions, I think leading on from what Richard just said, is fail actually a learn and a positive experience? And I think that would be great to probe into. I think the second question is making sure the outcome is not always value. Outcome cannot necessarily be, we've delivered this and we've delivered that. Outcome can be an experience. So I think, sometimes there's a benefit. It's just you have to take and look at the silver lining. Thank you.
Zubair.
Hi everyone, my name is Zubair. I'm a general manager from causaLens. I'm responsible for our work across marketing specifically, with it using our causal AI platform, but also I cover our work in supply chain, government, and other industries as well. Today, I'm going to be mainly focused around the concept of trust and why trust is a key part of the reasons why I think AI projects fail and what we can do to alleviate that problem. So that's what my focus will be today.
And Thomas.
Hello everyone, so I'm Thomas Neubauer, CTO and co-founder of Quix, which is a stream processing platform and applying AI on streaming data. Before, I was working in McLaren, and we were introducing AI into a motorsport and allowing engineers to use ML to react fast on what's happening on the track and change the condition of the cars. Today, I want to talk about how to actually solve that problem with AI, how to enable people to move AI models into production, and how to solve the first part of that, and that's how to get the data to the right hand. Thank you.
Thank you, all three of you. Let's just go back a little bit. What on earth do we mean by AI? Now, I suspect if you ask most of the people here, AI is this new thing called machine learning. It's model building, often using neural networks of various sorts. And we hear all sorts of difficulties of pattern finding, bias in the data that's being used for training, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We also have problems with missing data in the sense that categories of data just aren't there. Loans. If you are, let's go for insurance companies to start with. They are niche. If there's a niche insurance company and they've got this little group here and they've got years of data about acceptance and rejection, and now they build a model about that and it works a treat. No apparent biases in there, perhaps. And now they want to move to that cluster over there. They want to expand. Their model is trained over there. They have no data over there. Or do we mean something different about that AI might be several other sorts of things? Now, the European Union has published its AI Act just recently. It's a draft. Should come into a force in 2 or 3 years' time. But it provides a much broader definition of what AI is, which I think we'll find rather useful because it's looking at technologies which require or will require some form of governance and regulation. Yeah, pattern finding, generation 3 learning systems, but also generations 1 and 2 learning AI systems from the 60s, 70s, 80s. Expert systems, rule-based systems, symbolic logic type systems, etc., and also most of the big data analytics, predictive analytics stuff we've been using for 20 years. Now, if we open up our vision to those 3 areas, then we have a broader perspective of AI than this ridiculously constrained modern hype around neural network pattern finding systems. So let's have a look at what you do in the Bank of England. Are you looking at pattern finding or are you looking at sort of more structured, which allow compliance to be demonstrated?
I think we like to do everything, to be honest. But also, I think going back to your point about, what is AI? AI is different to everybody. If you're a data scientist, you think this is AI. If you're an office worker, you think something else is AI. If you're a business leader, you think something else is AI. And, and everything's now badged as AI. So, we try to do many things, but I think it's actually quite hard to make sure it's really AI, because everybody wants to brand it AI. And you're right about there's different components. But what we do in our data scientist team is we do lots of things, and some of them are AI, some of them aren't. But that's okay, because it's emerging technology. It doesn't have to be AI. It's new. It's novel techniques, and that's good.
And it has to have the label AI.
No. I think it should be a positive thing, or it's something else.
Zubair, do you have some thoughts on that?
I do, and actually some of the points you made there really resonated, and it's part of our thinking with regards to the challenges of existing AI, this world of pattern matching. So if we look at most forms of AI, you're throwing lots of data into the machine and you're curve fitting against it, right? As you were saying, pattern matching. This kind of correlation-based machine learning that is out in the ether, that's something that we at causaLens, we have a completely different position. So our belief and our point of view with AI is that AI needs to be fundamentally based on the science of cause and effect. So causal inference, causality, which is why we're called causaLens. So taking that science and instead of trying to pattern match and identify just the thousands of correlated features, to actually understand and be able to visualize what specific drivers, what specific business entities are driving my key KPI visually in the hands of domain experts, so that level of understanding as to why AI behaves in the way it behaves and why it predicts the way it predicts, is fundamentally based on that understanding of cause and effect. So it's very different to, I think, the most of the AI definitions that are out there in the media, and certainly the pattern matching, Richard, that you were talking about.
Thank you. Thomas.
So, I definitely agree that causality and the relation between correlation and causality is very important. My experience is that in most companies, there is a massive gap between what is in production and what's actually being developed by the data science or ML teams. And it's actually the models that are actually used in products are very simple and far from what the data teams have in their silos. So what I'm working on and what we're trying to solve is to make that gap smaller and enable people to be able to use the data that are coming from all different sources, and also make them enabled to move that new models into production. Now, this is actually quite challenging, and I think that companies that really want to succeed need to do this right internally. It's not just about the software and tools, but also about the processes. And yeah, that's my take.
Yeah, I like this point about causality that Zubair brought up, because so much of where we appear to be seeing some of the big problems with the application of AI, whether it's in human resource management, skills identification, skills assessment, pre-processing job applications, the problem is we don't have any causal models. We don't even have agreed definitions of half of these things. And it seems that one of the fundamental problems we need to be thinking about as we go ahead with our projects is to think about causality. Can we actually explain how these parameters here are connected to some decision output? And I remember one of my students who worked at one of the credit rating agencies, or maybe a credit card company, I forget which, was looking at the problem of what are the biggest risk factors in spending patterns on their credit cards. And they threw 100 columns of data at a team of nice, young, fresh data scientists who threw it into the model and came up, or into a regression analysis, multi-factor regression analysis, and they came up with this long 100-element, completely opaque formula. The domain expert got the same or better results with one column. And the column was, how often have you used your credit card in an ATM? This is entirely explainable. If you're getting cash out with a credit card, the likelihood is you're using that money to pay off another credit card. Yeah, you might have forgotten your debit card, but causal explanations. So how does this fit into the sort of developments that you are doing at the bank?
I think causality is, you're quite right, not an area that we have fully defined. I don't think anybody's fully defined or fully explored. And I would probably take a step back to say, yes, it's part of our agenda, looking at regression models and so forth, but what we have at the Bank of England within our RegTech and data innovation area is we have a research theme. So we encourage all of our data scientists, all the people who are passionate about this area, to do independent research, to publish research, to do it, as part of it, because we can't just innovate, we can't just work on things if we don't actually spend time thinking about the wider aspect. Well, why are we doing it? What's the inference of we do this? And I think that's really important. It's not just about doing it, it's stepping back and thinking. And often research is sort of deprioritized because you're not delivering. But in fact, research is just as important as delivering the thing once you've thought about it.
Zubair, thoughts on that? More thoughts?
On the research side? So look, I think that's quite an important factor. If we look across the clients and the customers that we work with, typically they range from the really sophisticated quants and data scientists all the way to maybe quite sophisticated business users, so slightly more advanced than Excel, but maybe not going to be coding Python in their background, in their kind of spare time, So what we see, and I think what you said is absolutely correct, that I think you need to give data scientists, because the name says it all, they're scientists. They need to be trying to push the boundaries of the science, and if that manifests itself in the form of really interesting research that can then be applied back into the organization, perfect. I think that's a really great thing. We do the same thing within causaLens, so we have our applied research lab called causaLens, and we, exactly like you're describing, we undertake our own research around causality, and then we publish to all the world's leading conferences, ICML and Europe's and so on, and then we bring that information, we bring that research back into our platform so that all our customers can then enjoy and avail of the latest research that we develop. So I absolutely agree, it's a crucial thing.
Yeah, so in Quicks we really believe in causality, and actually our main data scientist is a person speaking about causality. regularly. What we're trying to do with our customers is to kind of guide them to try this out, although not all of them really want, and explain what correlation-driven models can actually bring as a harm into the result. And some of the customers actually are starting to look into this, and I think the results are sometimes very interesting, and I think it's the way forward.
Okay, so we've now talked a little bit about some of the areas where the causality is more likely to be successful than pure correlation, because you've got a few gigabytes or terabytes of data, a few hundred columns wide and a few billion lines long. You're bound to find some patterns in there. It's just inevitable. So let's start thinking about what are the other significant issues. And one of the ones that we seem to be finding at the moment is people dive into AI because, well, everybody else is. There's fear of missing out. But we've known for the last, and I've experienced it now for 40, 50 years, that when you go into an IT-related project, and AI is just another form of IT, there is absolutely no point in going into IT just because the technology is there. And the question really is, are you seeing a movement towards, let's find out what the business problem is first, before we even start investigating technologies, because it may well be that we can use this brand of AI, expert systems or symbolic logic or inference engines, or it might be the pattern finding system might be good. How does this resonate?
I think you're right that over the years you can just buy technology to do things to be trendy, but actually what we're now seeing in the world of AI, emerging technologies, is people not necessarily building AI or other technologies. They're building things to resolve a problem or create an opportunity. We've seen more and more markets out there. We never had Deliveroo. You've got Amazon that knows what you're thinking. You've got Alexa. You've got all of these different things that are out there from a consumer perspective that are created because of demand. And I've never worked for those companies I've just mentioned, but at least for us, when we do our work at the Bank of England, our work is embedded in the business. Because the best way to solve a problem is to understand the business or understand your market and talk in that language. And then you kind of in your mind or with your colleagues is transfer that language into, okay, this is it in Python. This is what I could do. I'm going to create a Shiny app. I'm going to do, whatever it is. But it's that translation. And I think, now you're seeing data scientists who are talented in not just they're great at R, but they're also great at understanding the business, and they can talk both languages. And I think that is the key to success.
Yeah, absolutely. So if I look at, again, the work that we do with our customers, and our customers span virtually every industry, we have to always be focused on the overall value that any engagement, any AI project will deliver. And that's whether it's causal AI like ourselves and what we deliver, or if it's more traditional kind of correlation-based ML. Ultimately, we're in a game of having to prove, and this is whether you're an internal team or whether you're a vendor like myself coming into internal teams, you have to prove the value that you deliver. Otherwise, you won't be there tomorrow in a month's time, because someone else will come in and prove that value and prove to be far more capable and effective for the organization you're working with. Whether you're a government, whether you're a financial services hedge fund, it doesn't really matter. The same is true. So for us, the understanding of speccing out what is the projected ROI, if you like, of a particular AI use case before we start, and then actively tracking that through is fundamental to what we do. And we would never deliver or even start a project or a piece of work unless we thought that there was going to be some value out of it, because there's no point, as you said, just kicking tires for the sake of, hey, we've got some cool tech, let's go and use it. You'll get nowhere with that.
So what I see is that basically AI is in the digital transformation of a business is like a cherry pick on a very big cake. And what I believe is that the most important base ground is to convert the company into data-driven company. That means that throughout the whole organization and throughout the whole different teams, people work with the data, they can react to the data, and then when this is all working, not just technology-wise, but processes and people talking to each other, then you can start basically making your decision a bit more clever. And at the end, you reach the ML and AI. And at that point, because everything else is already working, you can really start building added value. But I think before you reach to that moment, it's better to concentrate on introducing data into your organization well.
Yes. We have moved over the years to this idea of concentrating more and more on the data and what the data tells us, rather than hunch and perhaps experience. Now the question is, and we see this a lot in the hype about AI, is should we be using AI to essentially get rid of people? And that was the sort of picture about 3 or 4 years ago. Now it seems to be migrating a little bit, that these technologies should actually be advisory. And it goes back to when I was a junior systems analyst. We did not allow our computer systems of any sort to make the decisions. Humans made the decisions. Computer advises, humans decide. How does that fit with the way you see things going? Thomas.
So I would say that it's an evolution of what we're building, and it's about the trust. So if the models are not trustworthy, maybe because they are at the beginning of the journey, then we see that people basically printing the results into dashboards and into different systems and making decisions. But I actually believe that as we get further and we get stronger in this problem, we will take action automatically, but it will take some time. And although I have seen a very interesting projects where ML models were actually a source of action, like for example, even a stopping train, it's very rare. And I'm just hoping that we get better to get it into more projects and more use cases.
I think you're right that the world has changed. It's not human or machine. It's human and machine. That we are enabled by machine. So when I think about, world where I come from, it's about judgment-led regulation. So, this is using human judgment, and now it's enabled by more insights using AI. And it's to the power of us. We can use AI to enable us to create new insights more efficiently, more effectively, do our jobs, do our home things, all of those things. So I think it's an evolution that we can see AI not as a competitor, but as a companion.
Yeah, and look, for us and for myself personally, I'm a firm believer in, as I think Helen was saying, the concept of the human plus machine. And we believe in that at causaLens, and we've built that into everything that we do. So, for example, at the very outset of any AI journey with a customer, that causal model, that representation of the world underpinned by causality, is both algorithmically driven in the first instance, but then we have this concept of human-guided causal discovery. So bringing in the domain expertise, so that the example that you gave, Richard, of the loan or credit risk person looking at a single column, there's so much knowledge that we have as domain experts in our fields, that if we just purely trust the machines aren't always going to get it right. You may not give them enough data, you may not give them enough context, but the domain expert will always have that context because they are the domain expert. So if you can pair the two together, which is what we do up front, then you've immediately tackled the problem, I think, which is endemic across most AI, which is the lack of trust. So you're pairing the domain expert with the machine up front. You're building trust from the get-go, not at the point at which you're delivering a prediction score of X is going to increase by 50% in 2 years' time. That means nothing unless you can pair that back. And if you can pair it back to having built it with the domain expert, fundamentally crucial. So yeah, causaLens, we believe in humans being augmented with these causal machines. It's a really key part of how we think and what we do.
Okay, so we've covered quite a lot of areas. Causality, we've thought a bit about our data, we've thought a bit about bias, we've thought a bit about... Well, one area we haven't covered is the fact that sometimes the data doesn't actually contain all of the categories which are actually necessary. And we see this in drug validation. There are normally very, very few data points, if any, of females before menopause, because the drug companies really don't want their data messed up by the monthly cycle, which led to problems. And also, of course, women might be pregnant, which is also another danger. Now, it means that we don't have data about a whole class of the population. And there are often going to be times where our data doesn't have data about a whole class, and that's a problem we need to be thinking about. But having covered that, now the one last area, I think, in terms of getting value quickly out of our AI projects in finance, is the people in our organizations. Now, what do we have to do about our teams, the change management, which is infinitely more difficult and infinitely, although much cheaper, than the technology side? And we've seen that with enterprise resource planning in the late 90s, early 2000s, that the technology was expensive, but relatively easy to implement. The change management of the attitudes of the people is incredibly cheap, or comparatively very cheap, but staggeringly difficult to do. It can take 2, 3, 5, 10 years to do it. Now, what do we have to do to start making a bit of movement on that front?
So I think the most important thing, and this is not new, is change is something that you don't do to people, you do with people. And a lot of the time, we've all seen change programs rolled out, different things over the years, and unless you take people with you, it doesn't resonate. And it's really important because this is an era of exciting technology, a real change in our workforces, in our homes. But if you don't make the connection and make it genuine, I think that's where the problem lies. People need to see what's the benefit for them. Is it really benefit to them? How does it enable society? How does it enable the world? Where is it? And I think a lot of what successful change is transparency, being open with people. Why are we doing it? What we're doing it, using the right language, taking them on the journey with you, but also expecting the results aren't overnight, because it doesn't deliver just overnight. The real change, it takes time. But most importantly is to be together as one, and that's where success is.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. So if I look at a past life, I was a consultant at Accenture, did loads of data transformation. So this is a world that I used to operate in quite heavily. The cultural component, that data culture that you need to embed into an organization to actually see, as you were saying, the true successes of any data-driven transformation are often the weakest sliver and the thinnest sliver in terms of budgets of any transformation program. If you look at the way the transformation is initially communicated to the staff that are going to be transformed, often it's in the form of a very simple edict from above, right? The C-suite and the function, or the head of the function will drop an email out to say, we're running a transformation with partner X, here you go. And it's like, well, okay, great. So imagine if you're the person receiving that email, what are you going to do with it? Like, okay, great, I'm being transformed. What does that actually mean? So as Helen was saying, that journey that you need to take people on, it's more than just a simple communication. It's really understanding what is going to make them tick now, what is going to make them tick in the future, what it means for them when you empower them with data. Because, as I said earlier, I'm not in a world of where I want to replace humans, I want to augment them. So what does that mean? Is that beneficial to them? How can you present and communicate that in a way that's going to resonate with them, so that they are, again, as Helen said, they're with you on that journey, they're trusting, and they're actually going to be participative, as opposed to just simply being transformed. It's tough. I don't think many people get it particularly right, but it's an area where I think if you are running transformation programs, please increase the budgets for culture and data change. It's incredibly important.
So basically, I think that what is important to get access to data with context, so that people understanding what data they're looking for and how they were being collected. I think the great example with the medical research is this context has to be included in the data. And I think another problem that we see is silos in the companies. So removing the silos from between the teams, so people actually can talk each other using the data. So data are shared transparently across different disciplines. And then when they're building decision insights on top of the data, it's also transparent and it's not a black box. So if somebody using this, they can go back and see how this result will actually be created and where it came from.
Thank you very much, Helen, Zubair, and Thomas. Any questions? We've got a couple of 3 minutes, I think.
Thank you so much for the highly insightful sessions that we've had. I'll start from a short story. When I was young, my dad was a lawyer. And then when I was young, there were the typists then used to use these very old typewriters. And then when computer came, the entire industry was wiped out. Very close to the high court, all the typists, they couldn't work again because of the change in technology. And it's been common knowledge with every industrial revolution, some people will lose their job. And it's a great fear when managing aspects of change. So I would like to know, how are you managing this type of fear in your company? Because if someone feels I'm going to lose my job, I'll be made redundant, the person will fight your project. So how have you maybe been able to manage this type of situation in your AI projects? Thank you.
Who would like to try that one?
I think it just goes back to the point that we made earlier, that this is about human and machine. It's not human or machine. And I understand we're in a new industrial revolution and it's very exciting. But at the moment, it's particularly with my perspective, this is about human and machine. It's not one or the other. It's about exploring and taking us to the next generation of insights. And I would look at it like that rather than anything else, I think.
I'll give you a point of view, right? So we are an AI vendor. We have a platform that we sell to our customers. So oftentimes when we're in that process, if you think of our typical user base, might be data scientists, many of you over here in this room today, we never go in and say we're going to replace you because we don't want to. We actually want to give you our tooling to help you and use our tooling. So it's a lot of the time it's how you kind of position what you're doing. The points that Helen made again are absolutely true. We never want to be in a world of replacing the human. We want to help and augment their decisioning. So for us, in terms of how we prepare our customers for that change, it's as I've just described, it's being really clear that we're additive and augmentive rather than replacing.
Yeah, so I have a bit of different angle on this, although I agree with you, is that I think making the technology easier and democratizing the tech that we use, the cutting edge tech to more people, actually allow us in the longer term to basically move the workforce to different roles. And I think that that would allow us to basically train people to different jobs and not left anybody without any job.
There's one other area that we can use these AI analytics technologies actually to make human lives easier by, if you're looking at, and I'm working with a company in financial services looking at abusive trades, and the whole aim there is to reduce the number of false positives that otherwise bore the heck out of the compliance staff. And the idea is to be able to just filter out as many of the rubbish that would otherwise have to be investigated by humans. And this makes life ultimately much more interesting because they can then concentrate on the really interesting and difficult stuff that humans are able to cope with, that you can't really train AIs or any technology to handle. But you can filter a lot of stuff and make life a lot easier. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. We've now run out of time, I think. No, we've finished now.
We actually have time for one more question, I guess, if you are happy to answer questions.
Okay. There's one there.
Yeah, sorry, Ellen, you said earlier that not every value is not the only outcome of every of a successful AI project or experience. So my question is, what are the key metrics used in the evaluation ratio of a successful AI project? And a successful AI project, the one that deliver value to the communities, or one that deliver value to the stakeholder?
I think it's a good question. So in my mind, value is not necessarily we've done a process in 3 days and now it's 2 days, or or we've got new insights on that side. Value is also a learning. So we do a lot of proof of concepts, and some of them take a day and some of them take months, and some of them work and some of them don't. But even the ones that don't work, and I don't try to use the word fast fail, I think it's fast learn, we learn from, and it helps us build other things. So there's value in that. Sometimes you just focus on, it's the value of delivering major projects, and that we've changed things and we've gone from 5 weeks to 3 weeks. that's one type of value, but I think the other value is learning from the experiences of trying out new things. So I think it's both things that we should be important to and focused on. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.